Hey, I'm glad to see y'all here for the last week of our Grounded family groups. I'm so glad that you've been showing up and talking with other people about what does it look like to be grounded, finding God's peace in the midst of an anxious world. We've been spending time memorizing scripture, talking about the Bible together, showing up at worship, spending time in our daily devotionals. And, finding peace in an anxious world is something that I'm sure we're growing in, but it's not something you learn how to do perfectly in just 6 weeks. In fact, it's sort of the work of a lifetime. So what we can do is continue to practice the things that we've been learning. We can continue to memorize scripture. We can continue to spend time with God each day, to show up each week for worship, to gather together and talk about the things of life and faith. And as we do that, we will continue to cultivate this life that is peaceful, that is grounded in God. Now today I'm coming to you from one of the 7 colleges and universities here in our city because people are being shaped for their future careers. Leaders of tomorrow are being taught and found here. And really, when you come to one of these colleges or universities, you're thinking about the future. Now, we've been talking about having God's peace in all things, but I think it's hardest to have God's peace about the future. We said that peace is trusting in the wisdom and control of God rather than in our own. That's really hard to do about the future because you can't control the future. And it's hard to trust a God you can't see with a tomorrow that you can't control. Now, I'm wearing a vintage 1975 t-shirt because that's the year I was born. And sometimes when we think about worries about the future, we want to look back to the past and say, back in the past, it was so much better. Back in the day, life was simpler. We didn't have to worry. We didn't have smartphones and we didn't have social media and everything about the future was bright and we knew it was going to be okay. That's what we think, but that's not true. We've been worrying about the future ever since we traded trust in God for trust in self. Because when you trust in self and you don't trust in God, your future all of a sudden becomes very shaky. Because you've got a tomorrow that you've got no power over. And if it's all up to you to make it happen, well, that's not really a place that I really want to be in. Now, when I feel worried about tomorrow, I tend to go to a couple different places. First of all, I might check out a sitcom or a TV series. I just want to check out for a little bit. I don't want to think about tomorrow, so I'm just going to entertain myself. The other thing I do is I try to clean something. So I'll go clean up the kitchen or I'll clean off my desk. I'm going to try and get in control of something because this future I can't control. So I'm going to try and control today. But you know what happens when I get done watching the show or cleaning the kitchen? Everything might be spotless. Everything might look better, but I don't have peace. Because peace doesn't come from getting in control and it doesn't come from checking out an entertainment. It comes from trusting God. And so what I've found in recent months is the best thing I can do is to read scripture and to pray. Psalm 37 has become a go-to place for me when I'm thinking about the future because in Psalm 37, it tells me over and over, do not fret, do not worry. God has an inheritance for you. God has secured your future, so delight in Him, trust in Him, and He is going to make a way. So I just read Psalm 37 and I pray through it, and I find by the time that I get done praying through that psalm and sitting in those words, I have peace. Now, Jesus has a lot to say about having peace about tomorrow, but He's very honest and realistic. He doesn't say that if you trust Him, if you become a disciple, you're never going to have worries again. He doesn't say that life with Him is going to be easy. Most of Jesus' followers were people right on the edge of poverty. And so when He told them to trust God for daily bread, that wasn't just an interesting add-on to the Lord's Prayer. That was their reality. They really wondered where their daily bread was going to come from. And He said, if you follow me, everything's not going to be okay. People are going to come against you. People are not going to understand you. You're not going to necessarily be loved by this world. But He says, I will give you my presence and I will give you my help. So tonight in our gospel passage, we're going to read what Jesus says about the cost of following Him, about what it might mean for you in your future if you surrender and go all in with Jesus. And while it might not be easy, He does say, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. So before we study this gospel passage tonight, I want you to talk together about this. If you could have one question about the future answered, if you could know what was coming, what would it be and why? Thanks again for joining us for Grounded, finding God's peace in an anxious world. And I hope tonight will continue to move us towards that path of peace with Jesus.